Richard is a professional photographer who made a fatal decision. He ignored the local guide's warnings to never enter the Salar de Uyuni alone. His arrogance, built over years of global expeditions, led him off the established tourist routes in search of an exclusive shot. Now, his Jeep has suffered a mechanical failure in the most reflective place on Earth. He is stranded in a desert of salt that acts as a giant parabolic mirror, concentrating solar radiation directly into his unprotected eyes. This is not a scenic disaster. It is a biological breakdown caused by extreme light exposure. The pain began as a sharp grit under his eyelids, but rapidly escalated into a searing, white-hot agony. The salt crust reflects nearly 100% of the ultraviolet rays, attacking his corneas and causing immediate photokeratitis. Every second spent with his eyes open causes physical tissue damage, a condition he now realizes could be permanent. The light is no longer a tool for his craft. It is a physical weight, a crushing force that triggers a violent, uncontrollable physiological response. He is losing his vision in real time while the sun is still hours away from setting. Panic is now his primary enemy, as he realizes he is miles away from any rescue path. He attempted to fix the engine, but the glare from the red hood was so intense it caused a temporary blackout in his central vision. He is trapped in a white void where the horizon has vanished, leaving him with no point of reference to walk towards safety. His breathing is shallow and rapid, a symptom of the shocks setting in as his brain struggles to process a world without contrast. The silence of the salt flat is only broken by the sound of his own desperate attempts to find shade. He is currently experiencing severe photophobia, where even the light leaking through his closed eyelids causes excruciating neurological pain. This isn't just discomfort, it is a sensory overload that threatens to leave him with chronic vision impairment for the rest of his life. He discarded his sunglasses earlier to see the true colors, a mistake that has now effectively blinded him. His professional equipment lies useless beside him, as he can no longer see the dials or the viewfinder. The photographer has become the subject of a survival tragedy where the camera is blind. His isolation is absolute and intentional, a result of his own demand to be left alone by the professional convoys. There are no tire tracks to follow back, as the wind-blown salt dust has already filled his own trail. He is sitting on the floor of a high-altitude basin, where the oxygen is thin and the radiation is at its peak. Every minute he stays conscious, he risks further retinal damage that no surgery can repair. He is a man who lived by his eyes, now forced to face a future of potential total darkness. The final realization is a cold blade in Richard's gut. No rescue is coming to this coordinate. Dark, permanent spots are now blossoming in his central field of vision, a clinical sign of solar maculopathy eating away at his ability to ever see detail again. The terror has evolved from the fear of being stranded to the absolute horror of a life spent in shadows. If he stays by the vehicle, the radiation will continue to cook his eyes. If he attempts to walk, he will only wander deeper into the blinding white trap. His own arrogance has delivered him to the last line of survival, where the very light he once lived for has officially become his executioner. Richard is facing the ultimate price for his arrogance, and his story is a brutal warning for anyone who underestimates the wild. Before we witness the salt flats claim what's left of his sight, subscribe to The Last Line of Survival. We don't just tell stories. We dissect the thin line between life and death. If you're here for the raw truth of survival, hit that like button now. Survival has no borders, but it demands a community. Where are you watching this from? Drop your city or country in the comments. Let us know who is standing with us in the face of the void. Now, back to the blinding white hell, where Richard's time is running out faster than his vision. The silence of the Salar de Uyuni is not peaceful. It is a heavy, suffocating weight that amplifies every heartbeat. Richard stands by his dead vehicle, realizing that his tactical error was not just mechanical, but geographical. He is miles away from the oasis, the only point where guides congregate, and his GPS is struggling with a high-altitude interference. The salt crust beneath his boots is a solid, jagged floor that reflects the sun's fury from every possible angle, creating a 360-degree grill. He needs a plan, but his brain is already beginning to fog from the initial stages of heatstroke and dehydration. His first instinct is to find shade, but the red Jeep provides almost none as the sun sits directly at its zenith. The shadow cast by the vehicle is a narrow, useless strip barely wide enough to cover his feet. He attempts to crawl under the chassis, but the metal is radiating heat like an oven, and the salt underneath is sharp and abrasive. Every movement he makes costs him precious moisture, which evaporates from his skin before it can even turn into visible sweat. Richard is trapped in a paradox. The car is his only landmark, but staying near it means continuing to bake in the open. The glare has now reached a point of physical aggression that sunglasses can no longer mitigate. Richard's pupils are constricted to the size of pinheads, yet the whiteout effect remains absolute and punishing. He decides to use his emergency tarp to create a lean-to against the side of the Jeep, hoping to block the lateral reflection from the salt. His hands fumble with the paracord, his dexterity compromised by the neurological sting of the photophobia. The light is so intense that even the underside of the tarp seems to glow with a reflected ghostly luminescence. As he works, he notices the first signs of visual distortion that aren't related to the physical damage in his eyes. The horizon, which should be a flat line, begins to ripple and bend like liquid glass. He sees a shimmering blue band in the distance, a classic mirage that his mind desperately wants to interpret as a lake. He knows better. There is no water for 60 miles in that direction, only more salt and more heat. Yet the hallucination is so vivid that it creates a psychological pull, tempting him to abandon his only shelter. Richard checks his water supply. 3 liters of lukewarm fluid remain in his primary bladder. In this environment, a man can lose up to 2 liters of water per hour through respiration and perspiration alone. He forces himself to take small, controlled sips, but the salt dust in the air has already parched his throat, making every swallow feel like sandpaper. He realizes that at this rate of consumption, he has less than 6 hours of survival time before his kidneys begin to fail. The math of survival is cold, and the numbers are currently stacked heavily against him. He attempts to use his satellite phone, but the device displays a searching for signal icon that refuses to change. The high-altitude basin of the Salar is notorious for dead zones, and Richard has managed to find the deepest one. He holds the phone up, scanning the sky, but the movement causes a fresh spike of pain in his retinas. He is forced to retreat back into the meagre shade of his tarp, clutching the useless piece of technology. The isolation he once craved for his photography has now become his potential tombstone. The temperature on the salt surface has climbed to over 50 degrees Celsius, while the air remains thin and deceptive. Richard's heart rate is elevated, a symptom of his body trying to pump blood to the skin surface to cool down. However, with no wind to provide evaporative cooling, his internal temperature continues to rise steadily. He begins to experience the first wave of nausea, a dangerous sign that his thermoregulation system is starting to collapse. He lies down on the hot salt, trying to remain as still as possible to conserve energy. He looks at his professional camera one last time, seeing it not as a tool, but as a useless weight. The black body of the camera has absorbed so much heat that the rubber grips are starting to feel tacky and soft. He realizes that his life's work is currently worth less than a single bottle of water. This shift in perspective is the first sign of the survival mind taking over, stripping away everything that isn't essential for the next hour of life. The ego of the world-class photographer is dead. Only the animal remains. A sudden gust of wind kicks up a cloud of fine salt dust, which immediately finds its way into his eyes and nose. The salt acts as an irritant, triggering a fresh bout of coughing and tearing that he cannot afford. He covers his face with a damp rag, but the salt quickly crystallizes on the fabric, making it stiff and uncomfortable. The environment is actively trying to desiccate him, drawing the moisture out of his very breath. He is being turned into a salt-cured specimen while he is still conscious and breathing. By the end of the first hour of the breakdown, Richard is no longer thinking about his next career move or his exclusive photos. His world has shrunk to the size of the shadow beneath his tarp and the rhythmic throb of pain in his head. He watches the sun, which seems to be frozen in the sky, refusing to move toward the horizon. The crystal labyrinth has claimed many before him, and as his vision continues to darken with spots of permanent damage, he begins to fear he will be the next. The second hour brings a new psychological torment, the absolute lack of sound. In the Salar de Uyuni, there are no insects, no birds, and at this moment, no wind. The silence is so profound that Richard can hear the internal mechanics of his own body, the rush of blood in his ears and the dry click of his jaw. This sensory deprivation, combined with his failing sight, begins to fracture his sense of reality. He feels as though he is no longer on Earth, but stranded on the surface of a dead white moon where time has ceased to function. He decides to attempt a second mechanical diagnostic, driven by a desperate need for a distraction from the silence. He crawls toward the front of the Jeep, keeping his body as low to the salt as possible, to stay within the cooling effect of the chassis. His hands move by touch alone, as looking at the reflective engine components is now physically impossible. He feels for the fuel lines, searching for a leak or a vapor lock that his earlier panicked inspection might have missed. The metal is still dangerously hot, but he ignores the minor burns on his fingertips. As he fumbles with the engine, his fingers brush against a coating of fine white powder that isn't just salt. It's battery acid, leaking from a cracked casing caused by the brutal vibrations of the corrugated tracks he drove over earlier. The realization hits him like a physical blow. The electrical system is compromised beyond a simple field repair. His tools are nearby, but without a replacement battery or a way to bypass the ignition, the red Jeep is nothing more than a 2-ton coffin. The mechanical hope he was clinging to evaporates. The nausea returns, more violent than before, forcing him to lean away from the engine. He dry heaves onto the salt, an agonizing process that further depletes his rapidly dwindling hydration. Each contraction of his stomach feels like a knife, and the lack of fluid means he is only coughing up air and bile. He collapses back into the shade of his tarp, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. The biological cost of his small exertion has been catastrophic, and he feels his strength draining into the white ground. To keep his mind from spiraling, Richard begins to perform a mental inventory of his survival kit. He has the emergency tarp, the paracord, a multi-tool, and a small first aid kit. He remembers he has a signal mirror, a tool designed for exactly this kind of environment. However, using it requires him to stand in the open and look toward the sun, a terrifying prospect for someone whose corneas are already blistered. He wonders if he can even aim the mirror if he can't see the horizon or the target. The light begins to change, though not in intensity. The sun is finally starting its slow descent. But this only creates a new hazard, the lateral glare. Instead of hitting the salt from above, the rays now bounce horizontally, finding the gaps in his makeshift shelter. The silver tarp, which provided some relief at noon, now seems to amplify the whiteout effect. Richard is forced to wrap a spare shirt around his head like a blindfold, plunging himself into a dark, hot world of his own making. In the darkness of his blindfold, his other senses sharpen to a painful degree. He smells the ozone in the thin air and the metallic scent of the Jeep's cooling engine. He feels the slight change in the salt's texture beneath him as the surface temperature drops by a fraction of a degree. But the most prominent sensation is the throbbing in his eyeballs, a rhythmic reminder of the UV damage. He begins to count his breaths, trying to lower his heart rate and preserve what little oxygen is available at this altitude. He hears a faint, distant whistling sound, and for a moment his heart leaps with the hope of a distant vehicle. He tears the blindfold away, squinting into the blinding void, only to realize it is merely the wind returning. The gust carries a fresh layer of salt dust, which coats the Jeep and his tarp in a fine white powder. The disappointment is a heavy, physical ache. The wind is not a rescuer. It is just the desert's way of reminding him that he is still its prisoner. He tries to think about his family, but the heat-induced brain fog makes it difficult to hold on to their faces. They feel like characters from a movie he saw a long time ago, distant and unreachable. This emotional numbness is a classic symptom of severe shock and dehydration, but Richard perceives it as a peaceful fading. He realizes he is entering a dangerous state of apathy, where the will to live is being replaced by a quiet, exhausted acceptance of the end. By the end of the second hour, the red Jeep has become a monument to his failure. He lies under the tarp, a blind man in a world of infinite light, waiting for a miracle he no longer believes will come. The weight of silence has crushed his spirit, leaving only the mechanical process of breathing. As the sun continues its slow, lethal arc across the Bolivian sky, Richard drifts into a shallow, feverish sleep. His last conscious thought, a prayer for darkness. The third hour begins with a shift in the air's chemistry. As the sun angles lower, the temperature starts a slow, deceptive drop, but the ground remains a radiant furnace. Richard wakes from his feverish stupor to a sound that shouldn't exist, the sound of running water. It is a rhythmic splashing noise that seems to come from just beyond the rear bumper of the Jeep. His mind, now starved of hydration, creates a perfect auditory illusion of a mountain stream. He knows it is a lie, a neurological glitch caused by heat stroke, yet his body reacts with a violent surge of adrenaline. He remains motionless, his ears straining to catch the phantom sound. The crystal labyrinth is no longer just a physical trap. It has become a mental one. Every crack of the salt cooling beneath him is interpreted as a footstep or a distant engine. The cognitive dissonance is exhausting. To combat the madness, he reaches for his water bladder, only to find the plastic warm and nearly flat. He has less than a litre left. The realization that he is drinking his final hours of life makes his throat constrict in a dry, painful spasm. Desperation drives him to a dangerous decision. He needs to move, to do something other than wait for the sun to kill him. He remembers a small rock formation he saw on his way in, several miles back. In his current state, miles are light years, but the thought of a solid, non-reflective surface is an obsession. He begins to pack his minimal gear with shaking hands, his movements inefficient and clumsy. He is abandoning the Jeep, his only landmark, for a memory that might be a mirage. It is a classic survival error, born of a brain being cooked by its own blood. As he steps out from under the tarp, the full weight of the salt's reflection hits him like a physical wall. Even with his eyes squeezed shut behind the shirt blindfold, the orange light of the late afternoon penetrates his eyelids. He takes his first step away from the vehicle, and the salt crunches under his boots with a sound like breaking glass. The ground feels unstable, as if he is walking on a thin crust over an infinite void. Within 10 paces, his internal compass spins. Without the jeep behind him, the white world offers no sense of direction. He stops, his heart hammering against his ribs. The silence of the sailor returns, swallowing the phantom stream. He turns his head, trying to locate the jeep, but the white-out effect is absolute. For a terrifying minute, he is truly lost, standing in a featureless vacuum where up and down, north and south have no meaning. The panic is a cold spike in his chest, contrasting with the burning heat of his skin. He is a blind man in a cathedral of salt, and the walls are closing in. A sudden flash of light catches the corner of his eye. A real reflection, not a hallucination. It is the chrome of the jeep's side mirror catching the setting sun. He collapses toward it, sobbing with a dry, tearless sound. He has travelled less than 20 meters, yet it feels like he has crossed a continent. He crawls back into the narrow shade, defeated by the scale of the desert. The sailor does not need to move to kill him. It only needs to wait for him to move and lose himself. The thirst is now an all-consuming entity. It is no longer a desire for water, but a structural demand of his cells. His tongue feels like a piece of dry leather, too large for his mouth. He begins to imagine the salt crystals beneath him, grains of sugar, then ice, then diamonds. The boundary between his internal thoughts and the external world is dissolving. He starts talking to the jeep, whispering to the red metal as if it were a companion, apologizing for his failure to keep it running. The shadows are now long, jagged spears of purple and blue stretching across the white floor. This is the golden hour that Richard the photographer would have died to capture. Now he only wants to hide from it. The beauty of the landscape is a cruel irony. The most photogenic moment of the day is also the most lethal for his damaged retinas. He keeps his head buried in his arms, refusing to look at the masterpiece of light unfolding around him. He is a spectator who has been blinded by the show. He feels the first true chill of the evening. The transition in the Salar is brutal. Without the sun's direct hit, the thin air loses heat instantly. His body, already struggling with thermoregulation, begins to shiver. This is a new danger, hypothermia, in a desert that was burning him alive 60 minutes ago. The shivering consumes more of his precious energy, more of his dwindling water. He is trapped in a biological vice, squeezed between the heat of the salt and the cold of the sky. As the sun touches the horizon, the white world turns into a surreal landscape of fire and ice. The salt hexagons glow with a deep, blood-red hue. Richard lies curled in a ball, shivering and parched, watching the light fade through the weave of his shirt. He has survived the day, but the night in the Salar is a different kind of beast. As the first stars begin to pierce the darkening blue, he realizes that the crystal labyrinth is about to become a freezer. The transition from furnace to freezer is completed in less than an hour. In the thin, high-altitude air of the Salar, there is no moisture to hold the day's heat. The red jeep, which had been a burning hazard at noon, is now a block of radiating cold. Richard huddles against the spare tire, his body racked by violent, uncontrollable tremors. This is the glass desert at night, where the salt crust becomes as cold as dry ice. His breath comes out in thick white plumes that crystallize on the fabric of his shirt blindfold. The silence is no longer heavy. It is sharp, like a blade held against his throat. Hypothermia begins its slow seduction of his nervous system. At first, the shivering is painful, a desperate attempt by his muscles to generate kinetic heat. But as his core temperature drops, a dangerous warmth begins to spread through his limbs. This is the paradox of freezing. The brain, in its final stages of failure, misinterprets the cold as heat. Richard feels a sudden delirious urge to strip off his clothes and lie naked on the salt. He recognizes this paradoxical undressing as a death sentence, a sign that his internal thermostat has shattered. He bites his lip until it bleeds, using the sharp sting of pain to tether himself to reality. He remembers his emergency tarp. It is silver on one side to reflect heat, but in the absence of a fire or a sun, there is no heat to reflect. He wraps it around himself, the crinkling of the plastic sounding like thunder in the absolute stillness. He tries to create a microclimate between his body and the Jeep's tire, but the cold is a physical presence that seeps through the metal and the salt. His feet, still clad in salt-encrusted boots, have lost all sensation. They feel like heavy wooden blocks attached to his ankles. He wonders if frostbite has already begun to claim his extremities. In the pitch black, his eyes, damaged by the day's UV onslaught, begin to fire random neurological signals. He sees phantom lights dancing on the horizon, the headlights of a rescue convoy, the glow of a distant city, the flicker of a campfire. Each time he starts to shout, but his voice is a dry sandpaper rasp that barely leaves his throat. The realization that these lights are merely prison flashes of a dying retina is a new form of psychological torture. He is a man watching a private cinema of hope, while his body slowly turns to ice. The thirst hasn't left him. It has simply evolved into a cold ache. He tries to take a sip from his water bladder, but the nozzle has frozen solid. He has to tuck the plastic bag against his bare skin, under his armpit, to thaw the ice with his dwindling body heat. The contact with the freezing water bag sends a fresh jolt of agony through his chest. It is a cruel trade. His warmth for a few drops of liquid life. He manages to melt enough for one small icy swallow that feels like a shard of glass sliding down his parched throat. He begins to hallucinate the smell of wood smoke and roasted meat. His mind drifts back to a family barbecue from his childhood, the scent of charcoal and the sound of laughter so vivid he can almost feel the warmth of the grill. He reaches out into the darkness, his fingers brushing against the cold, indifferent metal of the Jeep's bumper. The transition back to reality is a violent shock. There is no fire, no family, no rescue. There is only the red Jeep, the silver tarp, and 10,000 square kilometers of frozen salt. To keep his heart beating, he begins a rhythmic tapping against the Jeep's rim. Tap, 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 tap. A SOS in a void that doesn't listen. The sound is tiny, a pathetic heartbeat in the vastness of the Bolivian Altiplano. He realizes that the Salar is not just a desert. It is a vacuum. It doesn't just take your water. It takes your heat, your sound, and your identity. He starts to forget why he came here, what he was trying to photograph, or who he used to be before the salt claimed him. The stars above are terrifying in their clarity. They look like millions of ice shards embedded in a black velvet ceiling. There is no comfort in their light. They are cold, distant suns that offer no warmth to the dying man below. Richard feels a strange sense of envy for the stars. They are eternal and cold, exactly what he is becoming. He wonders if he will be found as a salt mummy, a white statue preserved forever in this crystalline tomb. The apathy of the afternoon returns, but now it is chilled and brittle. Near the end of the night, a new sound enters the void, the groan of the earth. As the salt crust reaches its lowest temperature, it contracts and shifts, creating deep, booming echoes that vibrate through the Jeep's frame. To Richard's delirious mind, it sounds like the sailor is breathing, or perhaps it is the sound of the desert's jaws closing. He pulls the tarp tighter, his breath shallow and irregular. He is no longer fighting to live. He is simply waiting for the cycle of the sun to begin again, even if it means more blindness. Darkness, he realizes, is not the absence of light. It is the presence of a different kind of predator. As the pre-dawn glow begins to grey the eastern horizon, Richard is a ghost of a man. His skin is a pale blue-grey, his eyes are swollen shut, and his movements are glacial. He has survived the freezer, but he knows the furnace is coming back to finish the job. He whispers a single word into the freezing air, a name he can barely remember, and waits for the first lethal ray of the new day. The warmth of the hallucinated barbecue vanishes instantly as the reality of the Salar strikes back. Richard's eyes snap open, the fake embers replaced by the cold, rhythmic pulse of the light on the horizon. It's not a mirage. It is a mechanical signal cutting through the indigo night. The ticking sound in his ears, the ghost clock, fades into the background as his survival instinct takes full control. He is done waiting for the jeep to save him. He tries to move his legs, but they are heavy, frozen pillars. The frost has glued his trousers to the seat of the dead vehicle. With a guttural cry of pain and defiance, he wrenches himself free, the sound of tearing fabric loud in the silent cabin. He doesn't reach for the ignition again. Instead, he reaches for the emergency flare kit, hidden under the floor mats, his fingers fumbling with the frozen latches. Stepping out of the jeep is like entering a vacuum of ice. The air is so thin, it feels like breathing needles. Richard stands on the white crust, his silhouette small against the infinite salt flats and the towering Milky Way. He looks back at the jeep, his metal shell, and realizes that to stay is to die. He must walk toward that flickering light, even if his legs fail him. Every step is a calculation. He uses the polio method he once taught to students. Identify the goal, devise a plan, execute. His goal is the light. His plan is to maintain a steady pace of 60 steps per minute. He counts aloud, his voice a hoarse rasp that the wind immediately swallows. 1, 2, 3. The salt crunches like broken glass beneath his boots. Halfway through his trek, the wind turns into a roar. The salt dust rises, swirling around him like spirits. He begins to see the lights of the Salar, atmospheric ghosts that dance at the edge of his vision. He refuses to look. He keeps his eyes locked on the mechanical pulse of the distant beacon. A yellow heart beating in the darkness. His strength begins to evaporate. He falls to his knees, the cold salt burning his skin like hot coals. He remembers the stories he wanted to tell on his channel, the legacy of the last line of survival. He isn't a narrator anymore. He is the proof. He forces himself up, his muscles screaming, driven by a primal fury that the cold cannot extinguish. The light is close now, but so is the dawn. The dead hour before sunrise brings the lowest temperatures. Richard reaches the source of the light, a solar-powered weather station tower at the edge of the flats. It's not a rescue party, but it has what he needs, a satellite emergency phone. His trembling hands reach for the metal box. The box is locked behind a layer of ice. Richard uses the heavy flare canister to smash the casing, his breath coming in ragged, frozen gasps. He pulls the handset to his ear, listening to the electronic hum of a connection. It is the most beautiful sound he has ever heard. He speaks his coordinates into the void, a final prayer sent into the sky. He collapses at the base of the tower as the first sliver of gold breaks over the horizon. The Salar transforms from a graveyard of indigo to a field of diamonds. In the distance, the rhythmic thumping of a helicopter begins to vibrate through the ground. It is no longer a hallucination. The ghost clock has stopped. The real world is coming for Elle. As the rescue team descends, kicking up a storm of salt crystals, Richard watches the sun rise fully. He holds the spent flare in his hand, a symbol of his defiance. He has solved the ultimate problem. He has survived the impossible. The Salar de Uyuni remains behind him, a witness to his rebirth. The last line of survival has been written in the salt.